Here we are. Donald Trump is the 45th president of the United States.
Le président américain Donald Trump qui a prêté serment cet après-midi. Il est officiellement investi.
E così inizia il quadriennio di Donald Trump.
The time for empty talk is over. Now arrives the hour of action.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're covering this week. Transition complete. President Trump takes the oath, and journalists steel themselves for 4 years of who knows what. After 8 years of the Obama administration, we assess the outgoing president's track record on media issues. And with fake news fears spreading to Europe, signs of a counteroffensive in Germany and Great Britain. A billionaire business tycoon turned reality TV star turned politician now occupies the White House. The inauguration ceremony was broadcast live across U.S. news channels, media outlets that did not just cover Donald Trump's rise to power, but, some have argued, helped produce it. Where the coverage of the Trump administration goes from here is unclear. However, the early signs are ominous. Over the past week, Trump's chief of staff said that the White House press corps may be moved out of the West Wing, where for decades reporters have had easy access to senior officials. Last week, in his first news conference since his election victory, Trump renewed hostilities with CNN after it ran a story he did not like. And in Trump's book, BuzzFeed, which took that story further than CNN did, is a failing pile of garbage. And remember, this is the stage that American presidents and the news media have traditionally called their honeymoon period. We have two reports on the transition at the White House. Later, Barack Obama's legacy with the U.S. media and what that may mean for Trump as an inheritance. But first, what to expect in the news coverage of the new administration. Will the White House press corps be bullied? Or will reporters do, as some have predicted, rediscover the kind of journalism American reporters used to be known for, the adversarial kind, before many traded that in for connections to power, all too cozy and far too corporate? Our starting point this week is Washington. There's reality TV, and then there's the surreal version of that format.
I, Donald John Trump.
This was the moment a former reality television star became the most powerful elected politician anywhere. The oath of office that gave Donald Trump control of the Oval Office has all kinds of implications, starting in the West Wing of the White House. That's where the briefing room is, where the White House press corps resides. That is, until the new administration moves them out of the building, which President Trump's staff says is under consideration.
Having been a White House correspondent myself and having advocated for them when I was the bureau chief at CNN, the briefing room location for the press covering the President of the United States is vital and really sets a tone and demonstrates a level of access and accountability that's virtually unprecedented in the world.
If you move the press out of where it's been traditionally, you're sending a message that we don't respect you as much, we don't need you as much, we can take our message to the people ourselves.
You know, the press corps does not have access to 10 Downing Street in London, and they certainly don't have access to the Kremlin or the Élysée Palace in France. What it means is that people in the media and people at the White House interact face to face every day. Keeping the press corps at arm's length will limit the access White House reporters have grown accustomed to, but it may actually prove to be a good thing. When journalists get access, they often try to preserve it. And sometimes that means not asking the tough questions, not rocking the boat, such as when the Bush administration sold Americans a story about Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein has led Iraq to many mistakes in the past, principally by developing weapons of mass destruction.
A false narrative that went virtually unchallenged by all those White House reporters with all that access. And then there are those who argue that as bad as the signs are for American journalism under Donald Trump, his rise to power is exactly what American journalists need.
I see this as a springtime.
I appreciate you for joining us.
There are pieces of the American press long ago settled into a mode of calling up the officials and giving them airtime.
No! Oh, good. Josh, how are you?
General Keane, great to see you.
Congressman McCall, always a pleasure to have you on New Day. Appreciate your perspective on this.
If they want to hear something true, they're going to be able to do that with this administration, and that means they're going to have to get their information somewhere else. And I think that's a good thing.
Plus, and this is where I think there could be a journalistic spring, Donald Trump is very quickly going to put very serious issues on the table. We're going to repeal Obamacare and replace it with something else. There are a host of questions that go with that. Who's helped? Who's hurt? How does it work? Where does the money come from? That's an opportunity to dive deep and really explain to people.
There's a lot of energized journalists, but there's also fewer journalists than ever, so they'll have to do the work of what used to be a much larger professional army.
The press has created a rigged system.
He's certainly thrown down a gauntlet and brought a certain level of unity to the so-called mainstream or big media, and he's caused some soul searching, and we'll see what comes out of it.
I mean, it's possible that this will prove to be something positive for the press and therefore for citizens, but I don't actually see it that way. The signs point to a very tough time ahead for the mainstream press. I'm talking about the news organizations that do real reporting that is factual, and when everything that comes out of those organizations is branded as fake news, I think that actually the public is not served well there, and I worry about where that's going to lead.
Donald Trump is hardly the first American president to take issue with the coverage of his administration. At 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, manipulating the media comes with the territory. But no one has done it quite this way before.
We have breaking news we're following.
Last week's CNN BuzzFeed story on the alleged dossier Russian intelligence officials had on Trump, and the prospect that he was compromised by that information was in that respect typical. Rather than argue with the details of the reporting or the reliability of the sources, Trump simply called it fake news.
I think it's a disgrace that information that was false and fake and never happened got released.
Attacking two established news outlets and equating their work with the kind of fiction that fly-by-night online operators produced during the election campaign.
Since you're attacking us, can you give us a question?
Go ahead.
What his strategy lacks in subtlety,
Go ahead.
Since you are attacking
No,
our news
not you.
it makes up for ineffectiveness, which creates a whole new set of challenges for anyone covering this administration.
The incoming administration's strategy, and Trump's specifically, is to discredit reporting that they don't like, and that tends to run parallel with whatever they find unflattering or against their cause. So long as we have a free press, I think that it's in their best interest and the country's best interest to not assume victim mode and to embrace the power that exists to chip away at the forces that would chip away at them.
Fake news is not just the domain of right-wing conspiracy sites. You know, we're all familiar with some rather famous examples of fake news purveyed by the major networks and newspapers in this country. Real news versus fake news. It's a battle to get people to be equipped with the tools to tell the difference, but it's been a long time coming, and we're going to have to navigate this.
Donald Trump has been building on something that's been coming along for a long time now, which is that we're a very partisan society, we're very divided. The press has become a whipping boy. He may not be as well informed about foreign affairs as other presidents. What he is very good at is at marketing himself and now his administration. I think that he's a actually very skilled media manipulator, and that we're going to see more of that as we go along.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Manipulating the media helped get Donald Trump the White House. He was a soundbite machine, a ratings magnet, happy to take the free coverage and then less than thrilled with the scrutiny that followed. The honeymoon's over before it even started, and the prospects for the marriage are not great. That's the reality for a TV show that Americans will be tuning into for the next 4 years.
Other media stories that are on our radar this week. There's a new front line emerging in the war against fake news, Germany. And it will serve as a testing ground for some new tools that Facebook is using to fight that trend. Chancellor Angela Merkel has become a prime target for misleading stories online, false headlines, and conspiracy theories. That's according to analysis conducted by BuzzFeed. With Germans heading to the polls later this year and the government there threatening Facebook with fines if it does not do more to counter fake news, the company is saying it will use external fact checkers to flag dodgy stories, warning users before they share them. Facebook says it will also try to stop spammers from making money on viral fake news posts. Meanwhile, in Britain, the BBC is expanding its reality check service that was launched during last year's EU referendum campaign in the UK. It will fact-check stories that stand out on social media. James Harding, the Director of News and Current Affairs, said the BBC can't edit the internet, but we won't stand aside either. Where we see deliberately misleading stories masquerading as news, we'll publish a reality check that says so. 3 months ago, we reported on the shutdown of one of the main opposition newspapers in Hungary, Népszabadság. It happened under rather odd circumstances, and now a court there has ruled the shutdown illegal. Thousands of Hungarians took to the streets at the time to protest, and opposition politicians staged a demonstration in Parliament. The staff at the newspaper had been told on a Friday that they were moving into new offices the following Monday and to pack up their things accordingly, only to find that there were no new offices and that their jobs had disappeared. Népszabadság's owners, MediaWorks, insisted the newspaper was simply suspended and it was purely a business decision. However, journalists pointed the finger at Prime Minister Viktor Orbán and his government's continual reshaping of the Hungarian media. MediaWorks was eventually sold to a company owned by a businessman close to Orbán, and Népszabadság never resumed publishing. The court has ruled that the original owners should have consulted staff on trying to continue publishing rather than instantly laying off 90 people. The NGO Reporters Without Borders welcomed the legal ruling, albeit with a caveat. This is a moral victory for the staff of Népszabadság, even if the ruling, unfortunately, has no criminal or financial consequences for the newspaper's owner. A search is underway in northern Syria for a South African freelance journalist kidnapped there. Shiraz Mohammed was working for a non-governmental aid group called Gift of the Givers this past week, traveling in Idlib along the Syrian-Turkish border when he was captured. The day before, he texted his family to warn he might be abducted. Mohammed had been in Syria for 10 days or so, documenting the work of the charity, which demonstrated its support for its missing colleague.
Freedom to Shiraz! Freedom to Shiraz!
The group's founder says he thinks he knows who kidnapped Mohammed, but he cannot reveal that information. The New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists has called for Mohammed's immediate release. His abduction is a reminder that journalists face an unprecedented threat of kidnapping throughout Syria, including in rebel-held Idlib province, where Mohammed was taken. 8 years ago, when Barack Obama took office, he promised an unprecedented level of openness in government, and journalists coming out of the Bush years liked what they were hearing. However, Obama's media legacy, his record on press freedom, has more darkness to it than light, on whistleblowers, leakers, and the journalists they worked with. Under Obama, federal investigators went after the New York Times, Fox News, and the Associated Press. And his Justice Department spearheaded more prosecutions under the Espionage Act, a law passed 100 years ago than all previous U.S. administrations combined. Liberal Americans have given Obama a relatively free pass on his track record with the news media, saying he should be given more credit for his work on transparency and in his final days in office for commuting the sentence of Chelsea Manning, the U.S. soldier jailed for leaking classified information to the news media through WikiLeaks. Obama did talk a good game, reiterating with his trademark eloquence his commitment to freedom of the press. However, actions over the past 8 years speak louder than words. And when the new president is confronted with the next major leak of classified material, the legal precedents established under Barack Obama will make it easier, not harder, for Donald Trump to jail those responsible for the story. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on what Barack Obama's media legacy could mean for journalists and their sources under Donald Trump.
On January 20th, the 44th President of the United States swore an oath to the American people. It was 2009, and President Barack Obama promised to
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
The First Amendment of that Constitution relates specifically to freedom of the press, something that President Obama declared a priority on his very first day in office. He issued a memorandum relating to the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, committing his administration to a new era of open government, reaffirming a commitment to accountability and transparency.
I think he made a couple of good moves. I think he also ran into some obstacles he wasn't quite expecting. That was the time period in which we had the Manning, Julian Assange, WikiLeaks data dump. Then we later had the Snowden release. And I think Obama really, throughout his presidency, wrangled with how to handle controlling that highly sensitive information.
It's really been a tremendous disappointment. The Obama administration started out really strong, and he said all of the right things about FOIA and transparency and government openness, but in the end, 8 years later, we've seen a huge number of FOIA requests that have gone unanswered, an incredible number of prosecutions of leakers under the Espionage Act, and there has been a tremendous amount of pressure on the journalists as a result.
In their dogged pursuit of whistleblowers and leakers, the Justice Department and the FBI under Obama turned their focus on journalists themselves. In 2012, the Associated Press, one of the largest press agencies in the world, uncovered what it called a massive and unprecedented intrusion by the Justice Department. The DOJ were on the hunt for the source behind leaked information about a CIA operation in Yemen. They went directly to the AP's phone providers and scooped up a trove of reporters' and editors' phone records.
The scope of it was astonishing. 20 reporters and editors, home phones, personal computers. They went for all of this information. But probably the most outrageous point is when someone leaked information about an investigation in North Korea. And James Rosen from Fox got the information, went on Fox with it. They named him as a co-conspirator.
As a reporter, I will always honor the confidentiality of my dealings with all of my sources.
It was the first time that a journalist was made a criminal for doing his job of reporting.
Which takes us to the case of New York Times reporter James Risen. Risen was subjected to 7 years of subpoenas, responses, appeals, one that went all the way to the Supreme Court, as well as the threat of imprisonment, all for refusing to reveal the source who provided him with details about a botched US operation to disrupt Iran's nuclear program for his book, State of War.
I refused to testify or reveal any of my sources. And finally, in 2015, the Obama administration gave up and stopped trying to get me to testify. But it led to some bad law. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the government and issued a ruling that basically says there's no such thing as a reporter's privilege.
Reporter's privilege derives directly from the First Amendment of the US Constitution. It outlines a reporter's protection under law from being compelled to testify about confidential information or sources. In Risen's case, this protection was fundamentally challenged.
It set a very bad precedent. It means that there's no legal right, at least in the whole region where the Pentagon and the CIA and the NSA are, for reporters caught up in leak investigations to refuse to testify. And that means that the only recourse a reporter has is simply to agree to go to jail rather than reveal their sources. It's going to be one of the legacies of the Obama administration on press freedom.
And legacy, as his commuting of Chelsea Manning's 35-year sentence highlighted this past week, is something that really matters to President Obama. In 2013, the Committee to Protect Journalists published a report in which it called the Obama administration's war on leaks and other efforts to control information the most aggressive seen since the Nixon administration. In a 2016 interview, Obama himself was at pains to restate his pro-press credentials.
I am a strong believer in the First Amendment and the need for journalists
to pursue every lead and every angle.
And with the Justice Department facing a barrage of criticism over its dealings with the media, it issued new guidelines on when the government can subpoena reporters to try to force them to reveal their sources.
The guidelines that the Justice Department issued, saying these are new rules to protect journalists from unwarranted prosecution and subpoena demanding that they testify. Protection from who? It's protection from the same Justice Department for the last 6 years. That's what it would be protection from. But there is a loophole in there. And there's a loophole in there that waives everything if it's a case of national security.
And that loophole is what keeps many a journalist awake at night. Because should the Trump administration choose to take as hardline an approach as the Obama administration has, then the outlets that publish CIA leaks alleging Russian meddling in the election, and those personal details of a Russian dossier on Trump, could find themselves in very hot water.
It is possible that the Justice Department will be able to make a showing that says that this information is vital to their criminal investigation into a leak, and arguably they could hold a journalist in contempt if the journalist continues to refuse to reveal their sources. If the journalist does refuse and is held in contempt, then the journalist could be sent to jail.
Since you are attacking our news organization, can you give us a chance?
Your organization
You
is
are attacking our
terrible. Don't be
You're
rude.
attacking us. Can you give us a question?
Don't be rude.
Can you
No,
give
I'm
us
not
a
going to give you
question?
I'm not going to give you a question.
Can you state categorically?
You are fake news.
Sir.
Trump's mercurial temperament has set journalists on edge over how the next 4 years might play out. And his pick for Attorney General, Senator Jeff Sessions, is only heightening those concerns.
Decisions the Justice Department makes have great impact on how the rest of the federal agencies will interpret transparency laws. And if, for example, Jeff Sessions becomes Attorney General, he is not known for his open-mindedness when it comes to the media.
Obama has absolutely handed Trump not just a roadmap, the keys to the kingdom, how to clamp down on the press. And for all of Obama's talk about now, as he's searching for a legacy about how much he loves the press.
Settle down, guys. You all right?
Trump has none of that love for the press, and he's happy to tell you how much he hates the press. So why wouldn't he use that opening?
On the download now, our viewers on Barack Obama's legacy with the American news media.
President Obama sometimes criticized the press. He was worried that they spent too much time on optics and not enough time on the substance of policy. But he respected their importance in a democratic society, their crucial role in providing information to the public. Donald Trump doesn't seem to share those values. It's going to be up to the media to really stand up for the importance of the free press.
Finally, given that questionable track record on freedom of the press, the zeal with which the Obama administration prosecuted national security journalists, and his penchant for appearing more frequently on late-night comedy shows than in news interviews, we're left to wonder why so many journalists and media figures are so teary-eyed over their outgoing president. True, there always is a market for the rose-tinted retrospective. However, the hyperbole and the hot takes surely reveal as much about the news media and their view on what and who is checking into the White House than about who is checking out. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
There were no cameras in my apartment yesterday because I was sitting there just
crying,
weeping.
right.
I just burst out crying when I saw that moment. It was incredible.
Every time I watch this and just watching that ceremony, I was in tears.
Past 25 years, you have not only been my wife and mother of my children, you have been my best friend.
Sermon on Democracy, a song of gratitude and hope.
Barack Obama has always been known for his cool,
calm and steely-eyed in the face of adversity.
Do you believe that symbolism is equal in value as legislative achievement?
I think absolutely. You know, I believe in image.